I'm your host, Scott Norton, and welcome to At Large. On this show, I talk to world-class creatives who use business to bring their ideas to life. We'll hear about their creative practices, their most interesting stories, and the lessons that'll inspire you the way that they've inspired me. My guest today is Shane Heath. Shane is the founder and CEO of MUD WTR. A fine artist, interface designer, and endurance athlete, Shane created MUD WTR in 2018 so he could drink less coffee. By creating its own category, MUD rose to the fastest growing consumer company on the Inc. 5000 in 2022 and was named one of the best places to work multiple years in a row. Shane brings a distinct form of leadership to this company with a rare combination of right brain and left brain thinking and a constant quest to find a better way. Now, for an important disclaimer, I'm an investor and a board member at Shane's company, and they provide a studio to record our podcast. All of that makes me biased, but it also gives me an up-close view to the twists and turns of Shane's leadership journey and the company's growth. Please enjoy my conversation with Shane. Well, Shane, it's great to see you today and great to sit down.
Honored to be here.
So, I'm curious, what are we drinking?
You know what we're drinking. This is MUD WTR here.
Tell me about what this is.
Yeah, so MUD WTR, it's a coffee alternative. It's a blend of cacao, masala chai, which is a blend of its own set of spices. It's got functional mushrooms, some turmeric, some Himalayan sea salt.
Excellent. And so tell me, what is the origin story of MUD?
I feel like anytime an adult is pursuing something that they feel deeply aligns with their purpose, the creation story kind of like starts when they're a child in many ways.
Let's start when you're a child.
Kind of start when I was a child.
We like to get Freudian on this show.
Yeah. And so I grew up in Santa Cruz, which is, I think, a progressive health town. You know, we had a lot of health food stores growing up. It's kind of like granola hippie town, surf town as well. And my dad, he is a builder, so he's worked in construction. He now owns his own construction company. Built all the homes that I grew up in. And then my mom was a computer science major who took that degree and ended up working for the biggest mushroom grower in North America called Monterey Mushrooms. And so I like to say that I grew up around sawdust, mushrooms, and computers, which I think is relevant as you'll see later in life. I think as a kid, I was very called to creative work. And I think a lot of that was inspired by my dad. He was a builder, but he built homes. He built all the homes that I grew up in. So I think that inspired me and made me believe that you can bring something in your head to life. And then when I was in high school, my mom, being, a wizard on the computers, saw that I was inclined towards creativity. I was in some art classes and she got me into graphic design. Kind of like tethered those two worlds, bringing art and technology together. And so while I was in high school, I started taking some graphic design classes. And it was the first time in my life, I grew up surfing a lot, snowboarding a lot, mountain biking a lot. And I had some friends who it was just like, you could just tell they became obsessed and it was their thing. And they went on to become pro surfers and whatnot. I liked it, but I was never obsessed on that level. When I started painting and when I started doing design, I felt that feeling and that they must have felt from a very early age, where it was just like a calling. It was like I could get sucked in and do it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours.
It completely overcomes you and you find yourself in a state of flow.
Total flow. That was the first time I felt flow state, probably, was doing art and design. And that's an addictive feeling. And it's a feeling I think we should all lean into when you feel that, right? And so I graduated college, went and studied both art and design in school. I studied at San Diego State and found a really interesting and new major for that school, which was called multimedia studies, which allowed you to sort of traverse between the art department and the design department and kind of choose classes that piqued your interest. And so as I was pursuing my studies, I wanted to build a skill set that allowed me to be radically self-reliant when it came to building whatever I wanted to build. I guess, at that time I wanted to build brands mainly in the tech space, right? So I wanted to be able to speak all the languages that I needed to speak fluently to get there. Graduated college, there's a couple things that happened throughout those years that I think led me to more of like a health and wellness path. And probably the most, the one that stands out the most is in my junior year, I had a roommate take his life. Oof. Yeah. So it was an eye-opening experience. I mean, at that time, I think I was just living the typical student life, just going to school, coming home, playing beer pong on the weekends. It was kind of just fun, not thinking too hard about what's in the future. And that was just kind of an eye-opening experience and made me reflect a lot about where I was at in life, what I was doing in life, and where I was going. And I needed to start taking care of it too. And almost like a farmer cares to their crops, like it felt like this lifelong journey of tending to my inner states. And frankly, like I felt like, dang, like maybe I have been experiencing some depression and, some anxiety throughout these years, and using alcohol to, numb some of those things. And maybe if I don't deal with this, if I don't look into this more, like who knows, I could end up in a similar spot, And
so the suicide prompted self-reflection.
Yeah.
And,
in a very
and
deep way.
shined a light on something you hadn't necessarily noticed before.
Yeah. And I realized that, in many ways, I wasn't really walking my truth. Like I was kind of marching to the beat of other people's drum in many ways, just to fit in and just to feel normal and all those things. But this kind of was an invitation to explore more of who I am, and started to take a yoga class. I started to get into jujitsu. I started to kind of like, if something piqued my interest, I no longer was afraid to take the step in the door and try it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before it was like, there was things that maybe I was interested in, but it was almost like that radio station in my mind. I kind of tuned that out and just kept doing what everybody else was doing. And all of a sudden now I was like, no, I'm going to lean into that.
So was this the point in your life in college where you started rejecting the status quo?
I think I started questioning it.
You started questioning the status quo.
It was a little bit of an unlearning to relearn. And I'd say I think there's a natural part in me that wanted to do that from a young age as well. Like even as I got older, I started to reflect on like, when I was a kid, when I learned that like Santa wasn't real, it was a big deal for me. I was just like,
me too.
What? And we're not going to tell my sister, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like what else are we holding back here?
Yes.
And those were deep introspective moments for me as a kid where it wasn't just like a passing thing. It was like, what is going on here? Like, there's all these like secrets that the adults aren't telling me, and I want to know all of them, And so I was started asking why from a very young age, probably more so than the average kid. Mm-hmm. Obviously, most kids are curious. I think more so than the average kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a certain gravity to your inquiry. Mm-hmm. Your understanding of the nature of reality, the illusions associated with reality, and the questions that you ask have a deeper gravity than the vast majority of people I know. Yeah,
I just want to keep pulling the why cord until I get to something, and it comes in waves a bit at an early age as well. In high school, I had kind of like this accidental psychedelic experience.
Really?
Yeah. So
early in high school,
I guess it wasn't technically accidental, but growing up in Santa Cruz, it's a lot of marijuana growing up there. And at a young age, my friends and I started experimenting, and I was probably 14, 15 at the time, but I was a very young 14, 15-year-old. Mm-hmm. And it was like 420. I built a bong out of like 2-liter soda bottles.
Was it your first time, or?
I mean, we'd smoked out of like an apple before or whatever. Like I'd never gotten high.
Right. Oh, I see.
But we were like, yeah, we've smoked weed before, but it was like, we'd never smoked weed. Uh-huh. And, but it was 420. So, and I honestly liked like the act of it more than I didn't know what the high was yet. Yeah. So it was just like the act of it. And so I got really into building out of 2-liter soda bottles a bong that had, there was like ice in one of them, and like a chambers, there's gummy worms in one of, I was like a little kid. Yeah. And then we smoked this thing, and I got high for the first time, but like in a big way, like smoked way too much. And it was a psychedelic experience.
That sounds
probably one of the most profound, right? As a very young child, and had no tools to grasp what was happening. And it really was like a consciousness expanding experience where it just like a whole new dimension of reality revealed itself to me at the time.
Yes.
And I was a little kid, like
Right.
inside
14,
myself,
15,
a
yeah.
young 14-year-old, you know? And no one really to talk to about it, you know, because I felt afraid to tell my parents about it.
Yeah.
Talk to your 14-year-old friends about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
What the hell
it's
are they
like,
gonna
what are you
add?
talking
Yeah.
about? And so it was a very isolating experience, and it was I would call it disassociative in many ways, because all of a sudden I felt like I was having my own experience in life that everyone else wasn't having, is how I processed it at the time. I eventually like told my parents, and you know, we talked about it, but it took like a while to kind of come down from that experience and kind of just like feel normal. And you know, but it was an experience that really sparked a lot more curiosity around what is life all about? Why are we here? Like I couldn't just, it was almost like the next day at school, I was just like doing the school thing, and I was like, is this it? Like what is going on here? It was like the third, like the veil was removed. And
Wow.
it's a pretty wild experience that I probably, you know, through the later years of high school and college, like numbed back. And then when my roommate took his life, it was just like, that's there.
Yeah.
That's there still. And like, you still have a lot of questions, and maybe there are other people exploring this actually. And to be honest, like that's what I found podcasts, and I found people on podcasts talking about experiences mainly in like the psychedelic realm, where I was like, there are people out here that are talking about these things, like these deeper questions that my friend circle wasn't, you know, incubating conversations around. And
this is one of the incredible qualities of the internet. And I think you and I are very similar in age, and in our generation, you know, we both grew up in relatively small Northern California towns.
Yeah.
And then the internet opened us up to exposure to culture and people's stories.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden made us like international travelers and intergenerational travelers without even having to leave our state. Right.
Totally.
And so you discovered this medium and began like taking in all this information and all these stories.
Yeah. And it wasn't just learning and exploration, it was comforting. You know, all of a sudden I didn't feel so alone. And back to kind of the initial question here, you know, like graduated college, I was really wanting to start a company, starting to work in tech to get some experience. So living ambitiously, you know, in this office environment. And then outside of it, I was kind of exploring mental well-being, starting Ayurveda practice, yoga, jujitsu, getting into art more and more. So kind of like there's these dual paths that were starting to reveal itself in my life. And eventually they started to not coexist very well together. A couple years down the road, you know, when you're working in an office environment, at least for me, I was bought into like this hustle culture, sleep when you're dead, caffeine is going to allow you to do more and do it faster. And very quickly I was, you know, consuming probably the equivalent of 6 caffeine pills a day, you know, but disguised as a latte here, a little pre-workout there. You know, you don't really think about it as a drug, caffeine, but it is a psychoactive stimulant. And I started to feel incredibly anxious. And I think for me, being an artist, where, you know, after work, oftentimes I would come home and sit in front of a canvas for hours, you know, and I would feel, I could tune into how I was feeling, and how I was feeling really dictated how creative I felt, and like how I could tap into that flow state. And when I felt like my sympathetic nervous system, when I was like kind of in that fight or flight state, I wasn't creative. I think kind of the precursor to creativity is feeling safe. You have to feel safe to be able to connect abstract ideas, because if you're in that state of like fight or flight, you're actually looking for patterns. You're looking for safety. You're looking for knowns, and anything that's unknown, anything that's new is potentially unsafe because you don't understand it, right?
And your body, when you're in fight or flight, doesn't have permission to play.
No.
Either.
Right. And creativity and play, they're homies.
They're good homies.
Very good homies. So I started to question caffeine intake. Really, this is 2014, I think, and I started playing with, you know, different teas, yerba mate, decaf, whatever it might be. And it was just kind of like it was a hard thing because I'd start to feel good, try some different things, and then I'd be like, yeah, I can go have a cup of coffee on coffee break with my fellow employees, and then it'd kind of start up again. And it wasn't until I got invited to do an art residency in Goa, India in 2014-15, right around there. I was out of the country for the first time actually in my whole life, and was ripped out of the kind of the cultural prescriptions. And I call them prescriptions because if you're not making your own decisions as you're growing up, like what's right, wrong, good, bad, like what you drink, all these types of things, they're actually kind of just like, this is what you do. Like, and that's
right.
what you
That's
end up
right.
doing is,
especially in India, when you go to India, they're like, okay, now it's time for tea, for chai.
Yeah. So they have their whole different cultural prescriptions there. Right. And so just seeing the polarity, the differences allowed me to kind of see everything from a higher perspective, like a different perspective, and spent 6 months there. And when I came home, I think I was just much more well equipped to sort of unlearn and relearn what I wanted in my life, what I wanted to consume in my life, what I wanted to pursue. I felt empowered to find my own drum beat that I could march to versus march into like the crowds, you know? And came home, moved to LA, started working in e-commerce, and was, this whole time building skills within e-commerce, tech, brand building, marketing. And at that company, I started bringing this mug I'd fill up every morning with masala chai I fell in love with in India, some cacao. And when I came home from that trip in LA, I started hearing about these functional mushrooms. And of course, growing up with mushrooms with my mom, it was kind of I had a lot of comfort with mushrooms, and I was just like, each one kind of seemed like it had its own benefit profile that fit my lifestyle in a way. Lion's mane, chaga, reishi, cordyceps. And, I had no intentions to start a company. I was just like, in fact, I thought that I was dealt a bad hand of cards. Maybe my giant bong that I built when I was 14 years old, everybody else was fine.
Right.
But I needed something like this to stay sane, to stay creative, to feel good, and brought this to the office. And, very quickly people would be like looking at it, because at that time I had chunks of chaga floating in this brown sludgy substance.
Which is a big mushroom.
It's like, it looks kind of like bark. Yeah, it wasn't, it was hard to be indifferent about what I was drinking. Like, right. You saw it and you wanted to know more, and people would ask, and they, it looked like mud. And I liked that, people were kind of like questioning it, and I was like, yeah, it's mud. And, it was just like a natural play on words there, and just kind of playing into the provocative nature of it. And I think the aha moment that started the business was learning that I wasn't so different from everybody else. Everybody that I was talking to, pretty much everyone, was like, after I would tell them why I was drinking it, they were like, oh yeah, like I'm trying to get better sleep. I'm, feeling, pretty anxious. I'm trying to drink less caffeine in the afternoon, or this or that. And I was like, wait, I thought that I was the only one here that, like, everybody's drinking this stuff. 90% of the population's drinking this stuff. And you're telling me that there's, like, in my office, like 90% of that 90% is looking to drink less of it or quit altogether. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that is so interesting. In May of 2018, I designed the brand, put up a website, put up a post that said, I'm not mad at coffee, I'm just disappointed. So I made something better. And that's the answer. Long answer to the first question here.
You also discovered one of I think the core secret, that the key to being popular is to do something unpopular. Like, I remember trying to fit in as a kid and not really being able to really fit in.
Right.
But then when I started saying, well, I'm not going to fit in, so I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm just going to print my own t-shirts. I'm just going to build my own skateboard ramps. All of a sudden, people started gathering around me, and I became the center of that world because of these things that I was creating.
Yeah.
And then this light went off, like, oh, everyone, like, you don't just show up to the party, you show up to be the party. And then the party happens around you, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you did something, you're like, I'm different. I'm going to create this weird thing that really nobody else needs and only I kind of want. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden people start going, well, what is that? Well, I have the same problem. I want to
Yeah.
try that too.
Yeah.
And now you've created a movement around it. You've
Mhm.
created a company culture that I think very much wraps up a lot of this curiosity, introspection, almost like constant existential questioning that you described in your kind of early adulthood.
Yeah.
And you've created a culture of customers that also identify with this feeling that there's got to be a better way, and this feeling like maybe they were outsiders that were dealt a bad hand, but want to,
Mhm.
join on to what you're doing.
Yeah.
What would you say is the message that you were trying to send with MUD now?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's an element of inspiring curiosity, and it's kind of empowering people to have agency over what they put in their bodies, over how they live their life. I think is like kind of at the core. What I was sharing earlier around, we unknowingly sort of prescribe to behaviors, belief systems, and sort of things as we grow up. And there's this quote that I think is still on our About page. It's been there since day one. And it's a Mark Twain quote. And it says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And I think that quote illustrates kind of our ethos pretty beautifully. And it's questioning things to kind of get to the truth, to get to a better way. It's not like, even within that quote, um, it's not saying rebel against the majority for the sake of it. It's just saying pause and reflect. That's the underlying message, I think, is start with why.
Absolutely. Yeah. A self-reflection and really inspecting this cultural programming that we all basically, have been fed and don't even question normally. But that's brave to do that, because a lot of, especially like consumer companies, basically benefit from pre-written cultural scripts.
Right.
And don't ask people to, think or question those. MUD is now, dozens of employees, many tens of millions of revenue. MUD is a real business. Talk to me about the MUD business model and how does it work?
I like to say our products are here to evolve culture's relationship to how they to how they find energy through the use of functional mushrooms. And we do that through products that are formulated to drink habitually. All of our core products are sold in a 30 serving quantity, so you can sign up and build a daily ritual around it. And 85% of our business is subscription business, and we have, various tiers in that. And then we also develop products that allow you to personalize your mug based off of your desired flavor palette. And so that's kind of the primary business model is, building healthy habits. Over the last couple of years, our business has also evolved, I think, mainly to find new ways to meet consumers where they shop.
Mm-hmm.
So recently launched in Target last year, launched on Amazon, and a lot of these channels are, amazing channels to, be our first handshake with customers. We have different pack sizes there, and customers want to shop where they're comfortable shopping, especially for a product like ours, which in some cases for some people might feel, scary or risky. Like, I'm not sure. Mushrooms have a lot of stigma around it. It's also, potentially challenging, a habit that they've had for decades, and so we want to make it as comfortable as possible to try and get mud water in people's mugs.
Well, you're making the direct consumer part of the business kind of sound easy, but it's actually really, really hard.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like, most people misunderstand about these direct consumer businesses and a business like MUD?
I think for me, it's what I knew. So in many ways, it made it easier for me. I think for people who don't understand direct to consumer, like what they know or what feels comfortable for them, might be starting at like a farmer's market and building from there. I think just starting with what I love about it is you can reach a global audience with immediacy. So there's that. I think that if you know your brand and know how to create web pages that very succinctly communicate what you do, why, who it's for, in a way that is memorable. Like you can reach that audience with a lot of efficiency and in ways that like you could reach scale in an amount of time that you pretty much can't on any other channel.
Right.
I think what is difficult is doing that. I wanted to build my role around that. And so I wanted a atypical CEO role, I guess you could say. And I think as the role has grown, I think what's interesting is I think the world needs more creatives in leadership roles. I still spend at least 10 hours a week designing, one, because I love it, but also because I think it's the best thing for the brand. Whether it's designing ad assets, writing scripts, designing websites, all these things. I think beyond just the cost, it's more around the consistency, and you're basically getting the expression of the brand directly from the source.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't naturally arrive there, because there was a period of this business where you actually delegated more, right?
Yeah. So
how did you come to where you are now?
So this is my first time being the CEO of a company, and you're constantly getting fed information, whether if it's from books, podcasts, people in your network around what you probably should do, what other people have done. And kind of there's this drumbeat in leadership of fire yourself from everything, delegate, find people that are better than you, this, that, and that. And yeah, so I tried that and did that. And I felt very removed from what I loved. And I feel like in general, in creative field, it is a little bit odd that the more you progress in your career, the less of the creative act you actually get to do. So typically a designer at the beginning, they're doing a lot of design, then maybe they become an art director and they're kind of like 70-30, and then they become a creative director and they're pretty much just critiquing and like telling people what to do. And really what they're amazing at is probably the creative act, right? But the way the incentives are structured, it's kind of like you are supposed to progress to do less and less of the creative act and do more and more of the manager act.
Right.
And that was kind of what I was like, okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. And kind of went down that path. And then in a way just found myself in this like zoo of my own design in a sense, and felt like the majority of my weeks I was kind of living in an environment that wasn't natural to me. And it ceased to be fun. And I also just felt like the business would benefit from me being more involved in the brand's expression. And so, made some shifts, and now I'm very much so back in what it's sort of a creative director role.
Yes.
You know, I'm also, you know, I'm in the board meetings.
Yes,
I do CEO. I do the CEO work, but I'm devoted to finding time to do what really like I love to do.
Yes.
And it's both fulfilling for me, but it's really good for the business. And we see it in the performance. It you know, it's a win-win.
Right. Don't delegate your superpowers.
Yeah.
I think is one of the lessons
here.
here.
Maybe that they need like the footnotes in those business books when it's all about delegation and firing yourself.
Well, and I think that a founder to CEO journey is really different than a professional manager CEO, right? Because a professional manager CEO, like in a lot of ways, their superpower is that delegation, accountability, planning, communication. Whereas the founder to CEO, like almost by definition, whether it was artisan design, engineering, product, they have some specific craft. And to delegate away that craft is ultimately going to rob the business of this great gift. Yeah. And you've arrived back at, hey, how do I delegate what isn't my superpowers, but actually layer into my zone of genius day to day in the business. So you're also someone who I've witnessed be incredibly resilient, and also you're someone who has especially recently, a very like stable energy. How do you maintain your energy and your resilience through the ups and downs of leading this business?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of my skills is I have a really strong work ethic and a really high tolerance for discomfort. And I think part of that is again rooted in childhood. And, you know, my dad is just, he's a workhorse even to this day. Like he's strapping on bags and getting things done. Then after work, going and mountain biking all day and surfing and whatever, like he's just a machine. And so some of that's passed on to me. Some of that was, you know, nurture and nature, just watching. And then I think another aspect of it is through travel. Like I just see there's a lot of suffering in the world, and there's a lot of people that were born into much harder conditions. And when I'm in a state of stress or discomfort, I'm able to very quickly reflect on things that I've seen and put it in perspective. And it's almost like for the sake of those who are suffering in the world, like I can push through this.
Yeah.
So that's definitely part of it.
Wow. Empathy, gratitude, and really just making the most of the gifts that you've been given.
I have a lifelong ambition to reach my fullest potential.
Beautiful.
And I think in order to do that, you have to experience discomfort. And so from a young age, I've always gravitated towards hard things.
A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor.
Yeah. So like I'll just like do like random, like there was a time where I just woke up and just was like, I want to do a triathlon, like found one and just like rented a bike and just like went out and did a triathlon on the weekend, you know, just like by myself, just to like try something new that where I was like completely unprepared, and just I wanted to get myself into that spot where like I wanted to quit, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And I think that there's ways to kind of, I think that's like a magical zone.
Such a good practice.
And it's very hard. Like you have to find certain things to get there, and
Right.
you have to be honest with yourself, because it's, you know, I think, Jocko Willink or something was just like, everybody quits at 60%. They don't realize it, whatever. And
good point.
And I think it's hard to get there. And I think in a race environment or even a CrossFit class or a jiu-jitsu class, when you're with a group of people, I think it's a lot easier to push yourself to that limit, to that edge.
Yes.
And so, I try to do that with pretty frequently. Today I went, and before this I did like a cold plunge and just try to like get in there for longer than I was comfortable with doing. Just like a little microcosm of that.
Right.
That I think in the long run allows you to
mental
be
toughness,
comfortable with discomfort.
Right.
Yeah. And I think when you're starting a business, it's similar to like an endurance athletic event. Like you need to have a really strong why, and you have to have mental toughness. And I think the why, you know, the why comes into play when it's really tough, because, you know, if you've ever, like during a triathlon, for example, like at some point on an endurance event, you're going to be like, why am I here? Why am I doing this right now?
Remind me to not sign up next year.
Yeah, because it always sounds cool up front. You're like, I'll get the photo at the end and like tell my friends or whatever that I did it. But then in the middle of it, you're just like, why? And I think when you're starting a company, you're going to be met with a lot of those moments. And I wrote a post about this around like what I tell people when they come to me with like, I want to start a company, like, should I do it? And I tell them no, because you should do it. Like you should be so motivated that you're going to do it anyways. If you get demotivated by that, no,
right.
Like you're definitely not going to have it.
You're going to quit at 60%.
Go the long run.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's just built through those kind of three things. There's just like the gratitude, watching my dad, and then having more of like a daily, weekly practice of facing adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of groups and pushing through, you are part of a men's group.
Yeah.
Which is something that's always fascinated me. I've never been part of a men's group. Can you tell the audience about that? Tell me about that. What has that meant for you?
It's kind of interesting, right? You're like, well, I mean, I have friends that are guys. Like, what's a men's group? Is it a band? I think there's a variety of things. There's like men's work, which is a lot of kind of where a lot of people maybe like hear about it first.
What is that?
Men's work would be like you kind of have a facilitator that, you know, you're bringing guys together, and there's various like exercises you can do, from like eye gazing to just like group sharing, where you kind of have maybe a topic, or you're sharing like just being radically vulnerable in front of other men. I think is something that doesn't happen often, even with your closest friends,
Right.
right? Like with the boys, you're hanging out with the guys, you're talking about, the sports scores, whatever it might be. You're not really talking about like really what's going on.
Right.
And I think maybe at the core, men's group is all about getting to that. It's removing all the layers, removing all the BS, all of the facades, and just getting like radically vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's some of the scariest work I think you could do, to be honest. Like it doesn't maybe sound scary when you're talking about it, but like when you're sitting in a circle in silence and it's your turn to talk, and other people are like really going deep on what's going on in their lives or what their fears are, things like that. I think that's kind of what it's about. And in my case, a year and a half ago, I got invited to come over for a dinner. There's going to be 7 other guys, and sort of the prompt for me was like, we're thinking about starting a men's group. We'd love to see if you'd be interested. And basically we sat down around dinner, and we each had a moment to share a rose and a thorn. So something that was kind of motivating, inspiring, going on in their life, and something that was a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up being like a 3 or 4 hour dinner. Each person just kind of went even deeper and deeper, and you just like, you start talking, and then you realize there's a lot more to share, a lot more that's been suppressed. And I think it's a lot because like in our day-to-day lives, even in our men's groups that we consider friends, we're really kind of surface level stuff. And there's a lot that gets pent up, and I think it's very beneficial to both like tap into the masculine and the feminine in these men's groups. So also in men's group work, they have, where you're kind of like fighting or like wrestling and just like tapping in or like doing something really, really hard. And so with our group is 7 other men, various, I guess, stages in life. There's a successful CEO who's at an amazing exit, a brand that everybody knows. One guy's a kind of a life coach, podcaster, big personality, one of the most famous musicians in the world, world. It's a really special group of people, all so different.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been special, and we basically meet like through Zoom every month or a couple of weeks, and then we meet in person twice a year for like 6-day intensive retreats. Yeah.
Love it. That sounds so appealing to me.
It's really
I need
special
to get my act together and find a men's group.
Yeah.
Let me know when you're taking applications. So a few years ago, you decided to do I think it was a 5-day silent retreat.
Yeah.
And a day or two before this retreat, you were informed by a woman who is now your wife.
It was actually, I arrived at the retreat.
You arrived at the retreat.
Prior to them taking my phone.
Right before you gave your phone away, and you got a call saying, I'm pregnant with your child.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I mean, oh man. Definitely, it's just it was a wild moment. It was one of those like big turns in your life, and a new chapter definitely opened up. Luckily, my wife, she's amazing, and was like, you should still go to the retreat. And so I didn't know what to do. It was in Arizona, so it wasn't like I could just like drive home. And so I ended up spending, the next 6 days kind of in silence and relative isolation. This was during COVID. So a normal, they're called Vipassanas, and a normal Vipassana, there'll be, beautiful grounds with couple hundred people there. You're in silence, but there's still the energy of other individuals. At this particular retreat, given that it was in COVID and one of the only retreats that was accepting guests, it was me and one other person there, and he left halfway through. And so it was very, very isolated.
Yeah, I heard that he got a call saying that he was having twins.
Funny enough, he does have twins. I found out later. It was so basically a Vipassana typically is you're basically just meditating all day. So you're waking up, have a meditation practice, maybe you have breakfast, and then you come back, and for the majority of the middle of the day, it's 45-minute sitting meditation, 45-minute walking meditation. And the walking meditations are not a hike. It's you find a plot of earth that you can pace about 20 feet back and forth. So you're just pacing back and forth. And it was a wild experience. I think, yes, the news of becoming a father was definitely top of mind. And then also just going from after raising our Series A, I'd been building the company for 4 years. There was a withdrawal from stress. There was a withdrawal from solving problems. There was a withdrawal with waking up with like a mission. And I felt like, I felt like I was coming off of some like drug addiction or something. It was just, I was anxious. I kind of had that like pit in my stomach all day. I was doing nothing. I was meditating all day. And some of the most difficult moments was in between meditation. You just go to your room. Each person had their own cabin, and you're not supposed to exercise, journal, read, do anything. So it's just do nothing. And doing nothing is extremely hard.
Well, I want to talk about, at the time, the woman who is now your wife was not your wife at the time.
No.
And you two, how would you describe the relationship you were in at the time?
Yeah, we were exploring intimacy, exploring a romantic partnership potentially. I think that at that time I was 99% like of my life was spent building Mud Water.
Yeah.
Like everything was that. I was very self-centered. So
how did you align on becoming a father?
It was a long journey. I think it was a blessing that I got to spend that time in silence just right after learning about it. And I came home and I felt like I got some like deep rest, but also perspective. And yeah, we just had a lot to figure out together amidst, the company was growing and we bringing on a board member and a lot of things happening there. But then all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, we have to figure out, we got a new human coming very soon into our lives. And it was one of the most, like, those years were the most challenging years of my life, just dealing with like the stress, the uncertainty, the change of kind of giving up my like freedom and sovereignty and then accepting this new life, which, in reflection is in so many ways such a blessing. But I think I was still at that age and kind of had that feeling about that stage of my life being like taking away freedom. Was the feeling for me.
Yeah.
And I think
that's the lesson that I want to get at, because I think a lot of people grapple with the addition of a child in their life as a loss of sovereignty and a loss of freedom.
Yeah. And there's going to be constraints that will be brought into your life, but I think that there's this phrase, the freedom of a tight brief in like the creative world, and I think with constraints can bring, it's a different type of freedom that comes into your life when you have those type of constraints, where it's almost like it removes a lot of things in your life that was taking up energy and gives energy to other things and new things unfold. And so it's a little bit of a myth, I think, that you are 100% free when you're single or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Single, jobless, whatever it might be. When you have structure in your life, you can be truly creative. You can almost be more creative with that structure. And there's a different level, a different layer of fulfillment that comes with it. And then I think the other thing is like, maybe the desire for freedom is because I thought it would make me feel a certain way. But I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for isn't a state of like, isn't how our life looks or like the details. It's how we feel and what's going on inside. And so if you let go of control on how things are supposed to look, I think you'll be surprised, on what can reveal itself and there's so much depth and so much, so many interesting things happening when you have a child and you're building a romantic partnership, and you learn so much about yourself. It's like, it's the deepest thing out there.
Yes.
And I think maybe before, I think that was probably the most surprising thing, because before it was like, I want the freedom to explore and learn new things and go out and like constantly being on an adventure and sense of discovery. And like, you can discover so much by just looking within, but also having that mirror in your life, a partner, and then bringing someone else, like a human, into the world, which is just it's a mirror, but they're evolving every single day, and I think of Lion, who's my son, as just like my biggest teacher, but also student, at the same time.
Yes.
And there's just so much depth and magic to that.
Let's talk a little bit about drugs.
Love drugs.
I feel like you have a kind of an inside view of how perception of drugs is changing in society. How do you think about drugs, and what do you notice about how drugs are changing in society?
I think rules are interesting, and they definitely trigger my incessant desire to ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is there a rule around this and not around that? And growing up and kind of, watching all the DARE videos, and then kind of finding out like, oh, maybe MDMA isn't going to make my brain, fry like an egg, like they show in these videos, just led me to be very curious, and I think whenever I hear these are bad, these are good, that's when I start asking questions,
Right.
Especially if everybody just kind of buys into that. And I think drugs are just like a very interesting one.
Because at MUD, you've published articles and you've been written up in the news for for allowing microdosing of psychedelics.
Well, I think specifically psychedelics, they go hand in hand with inspiring curiosity and asking questions. I think that they can remove, at least during the experience, they can kind of remove some of those patterns that maybe, or reveal some of the patterns that you've been living by, give you that perspective and allow you to make changes, right? So a lot of drugs like maybe ibogaine or ayahuasca, the reason why they're being used to help people, whether it's with PTSD or drug addiction, is for that very reason. It kind of gives somebody the ability to zoom out from being on the ground in the forest to getting the aerial view.
Right.
And then being like, okay, I can see the way out.
Right.
And
ibogaine, for those who aren't familiar, is an African hallucinogen that is often used to reset people's addictions to both opiates and alcohol, right?
Yeah.
So it's a multi-day experience or ceremony. And people can walk out of it basically freed from the shackles of their addictions.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Have you ever done it?
I've never done it. I have a friend who just did it a couple of weeks ago. I need to talk to him and hear about it.
Where do they do it?
In Mexico is one of the main spots for it. But he doesn't have, PTSD or any addictions, but he works in, he donates to psychedelic research for veterans, and he kind of wanted to see what it was all about. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I look out at the world. I know personally multiple friends who've struggled with mental health. I know one friend who's taken his life. I've personally struggled with mental health, and to know that there are substances out there that can allow us to play in that space and potentially understand, potentially not just maybe subdue the symptoms, but to heal the root cause. That's super interesting to me, and I think should be interesting to everyone. I think as a culture, we love Band-Aids to issues. They're very profitable, right? Because you're not really solving the problem,
right?
But you're able to kind of help someone still. But the problem still persists over lifetime, right? And I think a lot of the pharmaceutical industry has kind of been built on the back of that mentality. And some may say that also the suppression of true healing modalities, suppress the thing that heals, and just cure the symptoms, right? And that's, I don't know, it's extremely frustrating to me. And like when I see articles about this, when I see articles, you know, recently MDMA just met a big roadblock with the FDA, and I was reading kind of like the details about why, and it's pretty frustrating, and it's almost like unfair, like they're meeting an unfair gauntlet that I think when you're looking out at society and you're seeing like, well,
the fact that alcohol is legal and available on every street corner.
Yeah, there's just so many things that are legal. Opiates, like it's just like it just doesn't make sense. But then it does make sense if you kind of like follow the money. And I hate to be like conspiratorial in that way, but I just can't find another reason why when there's so many people struggling, and these can show some relief with very, very little risk.
Right.
Especially compared to what I can walk down the street right now and just pull out of a tap. Like,
yes.
It's everywhere. And so, yeah, I think I love the idea of like contributing in any small way to that movement. And I think, you know, challenging the status quo, questioning taboos, it's all for the sake of mental health for me. And I think, you know, probably our highest version of why at Mudwater, and my personal why, is to heal the mind and explore human potential. And I think there's some substances out there, there's some compounds out there that just nature naturally grows that can do that. And I've personally experienced the benefits of them. So deep believer in it. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting space for decades to come.
Yeah. Fascinating. I think we are living in a golden age of changing perception and narratives around psychoactive, you know, substances, drugs, plants.
Right.
And I think the internet has really accelerated that. And I'm for one, very excited about the future of culture and drugs in America.
Yeah, same.
There's so many podcasts that are like deconstructing productivity routines, right? And like hearing stories of people getting up at 5 a.m. and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
We never talk about that on this show, but I want to ask you about it because you're one of the few people in my life who I feel like is constantly experimenting with this stuff.
Yeah.
Tell us about like, where have you arrived in terms of routines and practices that give you energy?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been that way. Like I've never been into tinkering with cars. I've been into tinkering with my own body, my own engine. After having a kid, I'd say that it's been so much more important to really put an emphasis on routine, and like you have to be very malleable and you have to find ways to make it work for you. Kind of the non-negotiables for me, just to maintain a healthy mind, a healthy body, is meditation, journaling, doing hard stuff.
That's good. Yeah.
And getting outside and probably like competition in some form. And so my daily routine is I wake up, most days, so, you know, having a kid, sometimes your kid will literally wake up every hour or even more frequently, and it just like destroys you. Like for me, I'm a pretty light sleeper and I need like a perfect environment. So I have the 8 sleep mattress. I keep the room at like 67 degrees.
What's your sleep setup with Lion? Are you guys all in the bed together? Is he in the crib?
No. He's got his own room.
Okay, he's got his own room. Okay.
Yeah, he's got like white noise blasting. It kind of sounds like a jet's going off. So it's like we got him.
He's in the
incubated
womb.
there. Yeah, fully in the womb. And then our room, we got the 8 sleep mattress. We got like blacked out, like cold room. I mean, we use a red light every night before bed. So we try to do that for like 20 minutes. I've been in a good practice of reading before bed, which is, I think, really helpful for me. And then I typically journal like super briefly before bed. And it's called the ESP practice. So I've been working with this coach. His name's Nate Zinzer, and he's the author of a book called The Confident Mind. And he's worked with athletes like Eli Manning, through Olympic gymnasts to CEOs, like across the board, and kind of like deconstructs what goes into creating a confident mind, and kind of like challenging a lot of you know things like the internal critic and so on. But one of the practices that he has me doing is called every night. It's called ESP, effort, success, progress. So at the end of every night, you kind of just write a couple bullet points on things that you did that required effort and like that you're proud about. Like I put in the effort on that. Things that were successful and things that you made progress on.
Beautiful.
Then there's kind of an extra credit for next. So it's ESPN. And next is just like what's coming, like get excited for what's to come.
Yes.
And I think it's really important what your mental state is in before you close your eyes and drop into deep sleep and REM. They've done some studies with athletes where there's one, the skier Bodie Miller, and he talks about how he always makes sure, like he was a professional skier, slalom skier, and he always makes sure that he doesn't practice until he's completely fatigued, because he wants his last run of the day, which is the run that like is going to be sort of programmed in his mind, patterned in his mind. When we go to sleep, oftentimes we kind of rerun the day over and over and over again super quickly. He wants the last run to be when he was like really doing well, versus like running yourself till you're fatigued and just being like sloppy at the end.
I see.
And it's kind of similar. Like at the end of my day, I want to write down like my wins effectively.
Yeah.
And what I'm excited about the next day. It's all about kind of creating a feeling in your body.
Absolutely.
Really. And so I'm creating this feeling of like, I'm proud.
Yeah.
And I'm excited.
Oh, and then you're going to sleep like a baby.
And then I'm going to sleep.
Not a real baby, but a metaphorical baby.
Yeah. And I mean, I've kind of A/B tested it kind of unintentionally where like I'm off the pattern or whatever. And I mean, for so many years of my life, like I was doing so many things unintentionally. And I think once you start becoming intentional of those little things, you can have massive impact. And so, the morning starts the night before. So like I try to do everything I can to get an amazing night of sleep, wake up around 6, and then I go to jujitsu. So I train jujitsu at 7 every morning, which is pretty interesting because I'm like still waking up.
Yep.
And you're just like fighting people.
All right, time to kick ass.
Wrestling.
Yeah.
But I think it's been really good for me because you're getting like a level of competition. You're learning something, like it's activating your lungs, your nervous system, like your mind, and just getting a hard thing out in the morning. Running a company, you're constantly met with fires.
Yes.
And I think the level of anxiety or the level of stress that something inspires is kind of relative to other stressors that you might have in the day. So in many ways, I try to set the bar in the morning in a controlled environment that I'm kind of inherently inviting in.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, that was hard. Being in this certain position, getting like choked or whatever, like getting this email, it's okay. Like it stresses me out, but it's okay. So I'm just kind of like priming my mind. I typically get into the office around.
It's like warming up your nervous system,
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I get in here around like 8:30 and I've been doing, a breathwork exercise, get a mud water. I try to spend the first like 30-45 minutes of the day just like looking at every metric I can about the company yesterday. So I'm just getting a grasp on like where we're at. It's kind of like I'm reviewing the Oura Ring, Whoop Band, everything for the business.
Yeah.
The metrics, the quantified self of
Facts.
the company.
Yeah.
And just like tuning into where we're at, what's working, what's not working. And then I start my day. Yeah.
Remarkable. I love it.
And then, after work, I actually just signed up at this gym down the street called Hume, and they have a sauna, cold plunge. So after work, I go and I'll run, maybe lift a little bit of weights. I've been getting into weightlifting a bit.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've changed my mind about, I feel like, over the last couple of years.
I need to get into that, but more so I need to get into this ESP journaling practice.
Yeah, it's
so
I'm
going to give that a shot tonight.
Easy.
All right, wonderful. Well, we're going to roll into some hot takes and some of our variety segments. Could you tell me a fact about mushrooms that will blow my mind?
I mean, it depends on what you know about mushrooms.
Assume I know nothing.
There's a theory called stoned ape theory. Have you heard of this?
I have, but please share.
I think it was after like the Ice Age, progressing out of the forest into kind of the prairie lands. In prairie environments, like think of, large grasslands where you have animals that are frolicking around, pooping. In those poops, psilocybin mushrooms tend to grow. And the theory is that apes, naturally being hungry and curious, for sure would have ate them, or tried them at least once or twice. in small doses, which undried psilocybin mushroom would provide if you just consumed it like that. In small doses, it's been proved to increase mental acuity and also libido. And so those apes that ate those mushrooms were potentially better hunters and also more
better
likely,
lovers,
and more likely better lovers, more likely to procreate and pass along the behavior of consuming those mushrooms.
So natural selection favored the apes that would taste the psilocybin.
Yeah. So like the stoned ape theory is basically like mushrooms were a big part of creating consciousness
and human evolution. Great. We asked everyone this question. Are you glad that social media exists, or do you wish it never existed?
I think it'd be hard I think our company could still exist without social media. I'm very grateful for it, for allowing us to share our message. I think there's so many benefits to that. If it didn't exist, I would be fine. Like I'd probably be happier. Yeah. I definitely don't need it to exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
everyone's a critic. We ask people to critique things on the show. Normally we'll have people, talk about Mr. Beast or the Cybertruck. But in your case, do you have any critical feedback from me as an investor and board member?
Critical feedback. Whoa. I don't know. I'd like to see you more. I feel like when you first invested, like we would meet every month or so. And, but I know we're busy, but when I first met you, I remember the first Zoom call we had. I was actually in Costa Rica, and I think you were with Josh Spear on Zoom, and I was just like, I really loved the way you thought about things and the way you're able to, like, in the moment reflect. You have a really inspiring sense of curiosity that I think I see that and I love that, and I would just love to spend more time with you.
Well, let's do it. I'm really glad your feedback isn't that you want to see less of me.
No.
Because then I would be I'd be in trouble. If you had to order a coffee from Starbucks, what would your order be?
Decaf. Decaf, oat milk, latte, and then just because I'm there, I probably get like the frills. I get a little like
whipped cream,
a little vanilla. Yeah, definitely some whipped cream.
You could even do like a dirty chai with the decaf.
Yeah, you could do that. But I don't know. I'm there. I'm just kind of like when in Rome,
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I'd go decaf, but then I'd treat myself.
Great.
Yeah.
Good answer. What's something that you know to be true and wish the rest of the world understood?
I think it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, where I think the assumption that I had for many years was being myself, following the interests that are kind of coming from my heart was something I needed to be like cautious about expressing in the world. And for me to find success, I needed to fit in. And I think what I've found to be true and what I'd love others to know is that when you know yourself and you are courageous in how you express that and the things that you are pursuing because of that, that's where you're going to find success.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. I think it rings so true. And then we ask everyone for one good recipe that people like to cook that you can walk us through in kind of cookbook level detail. What is your go-to?
I think my favorite meal, I mean, I'm simple in the kitchen.
Which is fine. Fine.
I'm efficient.
Yes.
I'm looking for...
You're an essentialist.
I'm looking for function.
Yep.
But I think my favorite meal, like when I have friends over, like I'll get some really good New York strips. And I do butter, garlic seasoning, and like the chunky Celtic sea salt.
Yep.
Pretty much it. And I'll try to turn up the cast iron pan.
Yep.
Super, super hot.
Yep.
Have like a thick layer of butter on that, sear it, and then I turn it low, and then I put a cap on it, and I just kind of like let it cook from there. And pretty much serve that up with maybe some broccolini, and
Oh yeah.
that's all you need.
Oh, it sounds delicious.
Yeah.
So
Not complex.
So New York strips, and they're basically seared on the outside. You have a nice crust, nice Maillard.
Keeps everything in there too, right?
You cook right, and you cook them medium rare, so pink on the inside.
Yeah.
And you put the garlic on midway through, so it's a little bit cooked, or you put it on kind of raw at the end, or how do you do the garlic?
Yeah, midway through, and then I have a little bit on the end.
Yeah.
Side.
Beautiful.
And then I'm also a big charcuterie board artist.
Yes.
I would call myself.
Yes.
There's not really a recipe to that, but I'd say a couple.
No, that's pure jazz.
A couple elements that you want is the honeycomb.
Oh yeah.
So you need honey.
Oh, both visually and also yeah.
And so yeah, most times when I get invited to a dinner and it's more of a potluck, I come with the most ridiculous charcuterie board you could ever imagine.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, those are my go-tos.
You're a great house
They're
guest.
all function.
Yeah.
But they do get a lot of pop.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, where can people follow you and find you?
Yeah, me personally, you can follow me on Instagram. It's So Many Possibilities is my handle. And then I've been pretty active on LinkedIn as of late as well. So Shane Heath on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, Shane, thank you so much for opening up today and for sharing your story.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into At Large. Today's episode was produced by Sick Bird Productions. Our theme song is Son of Sanford by Motion Worker. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and by email at atlargeshow.com. Follow me at SWH Norton on Instagram and Twitter, and DM me about the guests you want to hear on the show.